person doing with their head in the sand? It could be that he's avoiding some very important transition to sustainability questions. That's what this presentation is about. This presentation is related to the Sustainable Development Goals, and it introduces you to the Inner Development Goals and a dynamic tool to balance the action you take in the world with the inner work necessary to sustain it. And the core of the Inner Development Goals is we can't manage the transition to a healthier world alone, but we need to work together. But first, let's land. What I'd normally do if I were giving a workshop on this subject is I'd make sure I take time to create a trusting and a safe atmosphere. So the first thing that I ask students to do is to leave their laptops and their phones at the back of the class so that we can have a screen-free environment. Most of the time they don't like that, but when it's done and they've had the workshop, they loved it. So I usually start with a short meditation for them to land in the body. And then I tell them I'm going to tell a short story or give a short lecture. And for people who find it difficult to concentrate, I offer them a little wooden doll that they can fiddle with. And strangely enough, most people really like to have something to hold on to when they're listening. I also explain about if we're working in English and English is not the native language for most of the students, I explain the expectations that it's really not important to be good at English. You don't have to worry about how you spell anything in your writing. You don't have to worry how your English sounds. And I remind them that the most widely spoken language in the world is horrible English. And then I ask them to feel physically comfortable, to make sure they're comfortable in the space. If they want to take their shoes off, that's fine. If they want to walk around whilst they're listening, that's also fine. Maybe open a window. So basically, I ask them to balance their individual needs for comfort and concentration with the needs of the community around them. And actually, by doing this, we've already started working on the Inner Development Goals. And then I tell them that once they've landed, I'm going to share a short story about the Sustainable Development Goals and how they relate to the Inner Development Goals, and then we'll practice. So here goes. Here's the story. These are probably recognizable to most of you, and they're the Sustainable Development Goals, and they were a roadmap made by the United Nations. They were signed by 192 countries in 2015, and the idea was that we'd have them finished and achieved in all countries by 2030, and they're a roadmap for creating a healthy planet for all living beings. So it was a great idea, but like many great ideas, actually making it work is harder. So these goals, you could say, are well-intentioned, but they're also painfully slow. There's also quite a lot of critique about them that's emerged in the last years. So should we be sustaining a system which is actually faulty in itself? Do we really want economic growth, for example? That's number 8. Meanwhile, whilst these have been up and running, the discussion has moved from sustainability to regeneration. However, we'll continue basing our work on the Sustainable Development Goals, as this is the best globally agreed blueprint that we currently have. Meanwhile, 2030 is in sight, but we're a long way from achieving these goals. And we also seem to be lacking a sense of urgency to get us here. So remember the picture at the beginning with the guy with his head in the sand? That seems to be the mindset that a lot of us have. If we look at how we're doing in the Netherlands on the Sustainable Development Goals, if we look at the government pages on this, then they say, okay, the Netherlands has laid the foundations for good health, quality education, decent work for most people, and strong institutions. So they've laid the foundations, but they're very unlikely to achieve these SDGs by 2030. Also, as a country, we're very far behind on 14 and 15. So that's SDGs for ecosystems and biodiversity. And we're also behind other EU countries on number 13, that's climate action, and, surprisingly, number 5, which is gender equality. In fact, we're gradually declining in gender equality. 6 years ago, the Netherlands used to be in the global top 10 in terms of gender equality. But now we're really sinking, and it's less and less likely that there's gender equality in Parliament and in management roles. Less than many EU countries. So that's problematic. Also, the aim was to integrate these Sustainable Development Goals into education systems, but if you ask many students in Holland, their knowledge of the Sustainable Development Goals is still pretty patchy. And many have managed to graduate without really having learnt about or applied the Sustainable Development Goals. So, as you can see, we have some problems. Meanwhile, we're operating in what's called a VUCA period. So a period of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think if you just a glance at the daily news will give you plenty of examples of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So, at a moment when we should be taking well-informed and urgent action for sustainability, we often experience paralysis, and it can be very tempting to do this, which is where we started. So basically pretend that it's not happening. And what is recognized now in the literature, in science, is that there's a recognition that we have a doing-knowing gap. So we know a huge amount. We know we have masses of science about global warming, about biodiversity loss, etc. But we find it very hard to actually do something. It seems almost like the more science we have, the less we act. And we also realize that a tech fix is not going to be enough, but we need somehow to make bigger changes. So, if we zoom out and think, what can help us with making this transition from old systems which are faulty to new systems which are healthier? And this comes from MIT, from Theory U, and students react very well to this image because it makes things a lot clearer. So if you say we want to move from the mindset of ego to eco, then you can explain that the idea of an eco mindset is that we work in hierarchies, that one species or different kinds of people are above each other. And it's based on these old 20th century ideas of colonialism, extractive, using fossil fuels, patriarchy, the head is more important than the body. And that nature is somehow unimportant and sort of at the bottom of the hierarchy. But if you think about a shift to an eco mindset, then things can start happening, things can start moving. This is the idea that as humans, we're part of an interconnected and an interdependent system. So we can't survive without creating and balancing reciprocal relationships with the living world and living beings and the natural world around us. So this is some of the thinking behind the Inner Development Goals. And I'll read you this quote. The sustainability crisis is not simply a technical problem, but a human crisis of disconnection from ourselves, each other, and our place in the global ecosystem. It thus requires an inner response. And that's really where the shift has happened. This is the core of what the Inner Development Goals can offer. So here we have the relationship between the Sustainable Development Goals and the Inner Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals you can see as an inspiring operating system for the planet, and the Inner Development Goals you can see as an inspiring operating system for individuals and organizations. So the core idea here is that what can help us to achieve sustainability is not more information or more science or a tech fix, but a mind shift and a focus on the inner skills and qualities that we need to do the work of achieving the SDGs. So enter the Inner Development Goals, or the IDGs. And these are 23 skills. They're divided across 5 categories, and they're grounded in a huge amount of research and evidence. So the 5 categories are being, your relationship to yourself, thinking, cognitive skills, relating, caring for others and the world, collaborating, social skills, and acting, which is driving change. And where do these come from, these Inner Development Goals? They're not from the UN. They come from a civic and an academic initiative, which is based on a huge amount of research, as I said. So I think they've looked at something like 10,000 peer-reviewed articles into all kinds of fields. So fields of human cognition, emotional and interpersonal capacities, thousands of years of religion, wisdom traditions, philosophy, and psychology. So you could say these 23 capabilities are based on a scientific method, but they're not based on any specific spiritual or cultural belief. Having said that, it is a very Western and academic approach, so there's not very much, or not enough anyhow, knowledge and wisdom from indigenous cultures, and that's something which is slowly being integrated into the inner development goals. So it looks simple, which is clever, but actually it's quite complex, intricate, and deep. Let's have a look at all 23. So here they are, once again, the 5 categories, and in each category there are about 4 or 5 different capabilities. Once again, the idea is that these are the inner capabilities that you need to achieve the mind shift that we're hoping to achieve from ego to eco, or towards sustainability. So if I just quickly highlight 5 from these pillars, for example, you can talk about self-awareness in the column of being, and that's how aware are you about whether you're being reactive or whether you're being responsive to a situation. Complexity awareness in thinking, so how aware are you that we often operate in systems. Things don't operate in isolation, but things are often interconnected in systems. In number 3, connectedness is, what do you feel connected to? Do you just feel connected to yourself and your family or your group of friends? Or do you also feel connected to a community, a neighborhood, a city, and the wider world around you, including non-human beings? If we look at collaborating, then there's trust, for example, and trust is about, there's a lovely quote, they talk about how progress moves at the speed of trust. So how important it is to be able to build trust in order to collaborate and work together. And in the column on acting, then you have the capability of courage, and courage is about having the courage of your conviction. So if you see something that you think needs to be improved or changed, so rather than conforming to those around you, the idea is that you're bold enough to stand up for what you care for and put it into action. And basically these 23 capabilities, they reflect a value shift from sort of 20th century ego type thinking. For example, if we look at relating, caring for others and the world, then there are qualities here like connectedness, empathy, compassion, humility, and nothing about making a huge amount of money. So these are different sorts of qualities that we need. But one of the struggles that we have in this period of transition, and perhaps why the picture at the beginning of the man had his head in the sand, is it's very difficult to shift to new 21st century values of eco that we need for survival when so many of our systems are dominated by 20th century mindsets. And when I started looking at this framework of capabilities, I began to see that there's also some limitations in this IDG framework. For example, it's very linear. It's based on 1 to 5. I think also that makes it seem like it's very individual, like you as an individual have to start at 1 and go through each of these capabilities and tick them off. It also seems very cognitive. There's no mention of the body or the wisdom of the body or the community here. Well, maybe the community, but not the body. And I think that looking at the inner development goals from this point of view of its limitations, that triggered my curiosity into a more systemic and embodied approach to inner development. So then I came up with this idea that, and that's also based on a literature review. If we put embodied relational action at the center of the inner development goals, so it's about not just about your head, it's about your head, your heart, and your hands. It's about relating to other people, and it's about doing things. And then I thought we could play with the different pillars, so not make them so linear, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but make them more playful. So you don't have to start at 1. You can think, today I'm going to work on acting, or tomorrow I'm going to work on being. But you don't have to go from left to right. And if you look on the right-hand side of the picture, there you can see the person with their head in the sand still. And I hope they're coming out soon. I also did a literature review into a more embodied and arts-based approach to engaging with inner development. And this showed that often inner development is not something you do on your own. It's often something that you do as part of a collective, and often you do as part of acting as well. And the literature shows that if you work in an embodied way, so if you use your senses, or if you're writing, or if you're moving, or if you're exploring outside, then this can trigger your intuition and the wisdom of the body. It can trigger empathy and interdependence, and it can offer what we call a liminal space for not knowing. So you get a chance to not know what the solution is. And out of that not knowing, you can see that all sorts of non-linear solutions to complex issues can emerge, which maybe wouldn't happen if you were just working cognitively and individually. So what we thought is, this is lovely, but then I thought maybe it's a bit too complex. So then I took a next step. And I simplified this systemic approach to make it workable in our everyday Habio education. So I moved it from a linear framework to a more systemic and dynamic lemniscate. That's a new word. I knew it in Dutch as lemniscate, and now I know it in English as a lemniscate. So the idea of this is that it's moving, that you can, whilst we're going to focus on the 3 areas of being, relating, and acting, you can also step in where you are now. You don't have to start at being. So if you're in the middle of acting, you can start looking at the capabilities that you need for acting, but you don't get stuck there. And I think the danger in these VUCA times that we talked about is that we can get stuck. So we get stuck either in acting, doing, trying to change things, sort of panicking really, and that can lead to frustration and burnout. You see a lot of burnout amongst activists, for example. But the other danger of the VUCA time is we can get stuck in being, and we actually close ourselves off from the challenges around us because it's all too overwhelming and too scary. So we create a little bubble and we stay in our safe bubble, and we get stuck. And obviously being stuck in being or being stuck in acting is not very useful, and it's not going to help us to take action. So as I say, the idea is that this is dynamic, that you move as you need to. So when you've been acting and you need to regenerate or to rest, you go back into being, and you look at some of the activities that will help you to develop those capabilities. And when you're ready, then you go out through relating, connecting with other people, you act, and then you come back again when you need a rest. So it's like a dance movement. So the aim is for a dynamic and regenerative relationship between the self and the action that you want to take to make a difference. So here's an answer to the question of how to get our heads out of the sand. By focusing on intrinsic motivation and learning how to reconnect with yourself and all other living beings, you can develop the courage and the creativity needed to take action. And I think if we look at education and the responsibility that we have as educators, then it's our job to help students to connect back again with their intrinsic motivation and support them in that dance. So I invite students to think about what they'd like to change in their field and what inner skills they might need to do this. So once again, the idea is that individuals can take action, but without harming themselves, and they can keep renewing themselves. So it's regenerative. So once I'd gone through that research and come to the lemniscate, then things suddenly speeded up. And in September 2024, I joined the ESC network, which is the Expertise en Netwerk Systemisch Co-design, which is a collaboration between 4 hogescholen in Holland, Rotterdam, the Haagse Hogeschool and Utrecht. And I registered an IDG hub on the IDG mother organization. And as you can see, it's quite a long name, the IDG Netherlands-esque Systemic Co-design Hub. A bit of a mouthful, but those were the expectations or the criteria for the IDG framework organization. And then we created connections and community by making a sort of traveling circus type interactive IDG exhibition. And the exhibition collected data about how students and our colleagues what their concerns are, about the world around them, about sustainability, about all different issues, and all that data we've now put together, and that's going to be the data that we use for developing new education for sustainability that hopefully is much more meaningful for students. We also built a community group, and the idea is to be inspired by how mycelium works, and I'll show you a picture of mycelium in a moment. And how we're going to create a sort of mycelium network of interested people in education and connect to individuals who are interested in these aspects in their own institute, but maybe feel a bit isolated. We also hope to work together with students as our partners and create valuable collaborations so we can develop education together. And in this way, we make a sort of ecosystem of interested parties. So this is a quote from Audre Lorde, who says, "Each of us must find our work and do it." And as I said, I think our job as educators is to ask our students, what is it that you care about? And what would you like to change in your own working world, your own professional life or your own inner life? And what inner skills do you need to do this? So we find their own intrinsic motivation in terms of sustainability, and we support them. This is a quote from one of my colleagues who works in the IVT or the ICT in Holland. And she said, powering something big starts from something small inside. This is Loes Langwerder. And she talks about how systemic changes can happen just by taking small steps. So just step by step, we can make changes. And often the small things can be very satisfying. And that can help us, hopefully, to make this mind shift from ego to eco. I said I'd show you a picture of mycelium. This is a picture of how we've discovered relatively recently how trees in the woods, how they connect to each other via a network of mycelium, and they pass all sorts of information and proteins and all sorts of things. So we can learn from how clever the world around us is, and we can apply that. And mycelium messages move through mycelium incredibly fast. So I think the important thing to realize is this mind shift that we need to make from ego to eco. It's not something we can do alone, but we all have an individual role, but it's something that we need to do in community. And I think it might even be a process that we could grow to love, because I think if you've got your head in your sand, it's not necessarily easy having your head in the sand. But if we are connected, if we feel we're working together, if we feel we're having an impact, that's something you could grow to love. So this is our IDG Netherlands-esque Systemic Co-Design Hub, and it's up and running, and it's a network, it's a community. And whilst personally I'm leaving higher education after 25 very colourful years, I'm off to live a more embodied and arts-based life, but the hub continues, and you're very welcome to join.